Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 27th, 2011. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, preheating your grains while you heat your strike water. Is it practical? Is it useful? Home brewer Darnell Brawner joins us to share the results of his experiment. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. On Facebook, I'm at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And our show page on Facebook is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android apps on their respective stores, and BlackBerry users, you can find us on the BlackBerry podcast directory, too. Let's start out by checking the mailbag. Tony in Glen Burnie, Maryland writes, I'm listening to the Brewing Experiment episode and wanted to say I had no idea what a triangle test was. I looked it up, but I wonder how many don't. Great question. I think it's a great question because it will help remind me not to take for granted that everybody knows all the terminology that I might know. Jeff Karpinski noted in his experiment data last week, you may remember, that he did a triangle test with his two experiment beers, and he couldn't tell them apart. Well, a triangle test is a tool that sensory panel designers use to check how close two samples of food, or beer in this case, are together. What you do is you put two samples of one and one of the other in front of your test subject. Usually the three samples are numbered with three different random numbers or letters. If the test subject can pick the odd one out in the group reliably, then the samples are detectably different. If not, then you can say that the two recipes or preparations, techniques, whatever you use, are very similar. It's a useful technique and one that you can try at home. For instance, if you're trying to clone a commercial beer and think that yours is pretty close, you can put two of yours and one of the commercial beer in front of some friends and see if they can pick the odd one out. Ben from Newcastle, Australia writes, thought I would drop you a quick email to say thanks for inspiring me to try something new and do a 100% wheat beer, and a small batch at that. Having watched and listened to you and Steve talk about your 100% wheat beers and using the brew-in-a-bag method to mash the grains. Ben says, I usually brew all-grain beers, batch sparging in my esky, or cooler as they are known north of the equator, ending up with about 25 liters or 6.5 gallons of wort. So for this beer, I grabbed one of my stainless steel pots and my nylon mesh bag, and off I went. Ben says, I'm sure you noticed most of the things as I did on my brew day. The first thing that got me was I overshot my volumes. I'd allowed for too much grain absorption, so I ended up with only adding around half of my dunk sparge runnings. The next thing was my efficiency was way up on the normal 75%, being around 88%. And lastly, the amount of brake material in my kettle was vastly increased compared to my other brew days. I'm not sure if this is because of the higher than usual amount of wheat or the fact that the brew-in-a-bag method ended up with less clear wort into the kettle. Ben says, taking all of this into account, I still got my smaller volume into my fermenter, around 8 liters or 2 gallons, and the wort was very light in color. I've hopped the beer to around 23 IBU using Czech Saaz, or Zatz, with some generous late additions and a good dose at flameout. Really looking forward to tasting how it turns out. Well, yeah, Ben noticed some things with the brew in a bag that I've noticed. Less grain absorption than a standard mash tun, especially if you squeeze the bag. Really good efficiency. And one unfortunate thing, increased trub. It's not necessarily a bad thing, really, in my opinion, other than just having to deal with more trub in the kettle and then maybe in the fermenter if you decide to transfer some of that over. It hasn't had any bad effects on the beer from what I can tell. I think it's a result of not having that grain bed in the mash tun to filter the stuff from the wort as it's being lathered out. Again, not a bad thing necessarily, just different. Then there's this from Eric in Washington, D.C. Eric says, when two of my friends announced their engagement at Christmas, I volunteered to make the beer for the wedding. Awesome. I decided to make 2 batches reflecting their personalities and upbringing. For the groom, since he was from Delaware, I decided on my own personal take on an ale that is hopped for 60 minutes that we all know and love. Wonder what that could be. That Eric says that was easy. The bride was tougher. She was from California and Pennsylvania and Delaware and D.C., but she was very proud of her Italian heritage. I have to admit I was at a loss. I brewed English and German and American and Irish beers, but my knowledge of Italian brews was limited to Peroni. Thank goodness for Basic Brewing Archives and the 2008 episode with Italian homebrewer and podcaster Tony Manzi. I loved that the Italians are using chestnuts in their homebrews. Problem solved, Eric says. I will make a batch of chestnut ale for my friends Brianna and Josh and proudly serve it at the reception. Well, very nice. By the way, I forwarded Eric's note to Tony, and I'm sure he'll get a kick out of it. And best wishes to Brianna and Josh. The chestnut beer, I'm sure it will be way tasty. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I got a letter from Darnell Brawner, who asked about preheating grains for an all-grain batch by submerging them in a glass jar into the strike water as it was heating up. He was tired of missing his target temperature for his single infusion mashes, and he wondered if there was any reason not to do that, not to preheat the grains in the water. I responded that I didn't know why not to, but I speculated that there may not be any real advantage to doing it, and I challenged Darnell to do a side-by-side experiment to see. And what do you know? He did. Well, Darnell Brawner, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Glad to be here.
Now, before we get started, I have to. I'm going to surprise you here. This is kind of like This Is Your Life, only on a very small scale. I got a letter from Don Arnell at Grape and Grain down in Statesboro, Georgia. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, he's the head of our local brew club, and I forwarded him the email dialogue saying I was going to be on the show.
Well, he said, Darnell forwarded me his conversation with you, and I did not realize that Darnell you spoke of in the Blueberry Experience was our Darnell. The reason for commenting is to add support for Darnell. We started a homebrew club in Statesboro, Georgia, September 2009, Blind Willie Brewers. Darnell started with us as a winemaker and jumped in with both feet as a homebrewer. He is very much on the experimental side of the craft. He even made a lavender stout in the spring of 2010. I had to laugh when you were reviewing the long shot competition and said something like, "Who knew you could use lavender in beer?" And I said, "Darnell." And Don says, "I look forward to hearing your interview with him." So there you go. An endorsement from one of your cohorts down there in Georgia.
Well, cool.
So how did the lavender beer turn out?
It was pretty good. It was actually one of my first beers because since I've only been brewing beer for maybe a little over a year now, and I actually have only been a beer drinker for maybe 2 years. I had to go to England to learn to appreciate beer. Yeah, when I was younger and my friends, back in the college years, I was often quoted as, "Oh, well, beer is an acquired taste like coffee. No one ever takes a sip of beer and says, that's good. It's sort of something you learn to drink."
Which is true with some beers.
Yeah,
or maybe
and
most.
the only reason why I think that was my opinion is because the only thing I'd had was the fizzy yellow water that's so prevalent in our society in the U.S.
Yeah, you learn to like that. Unfortunately, once you learn to like that, it's kind of hard to, if you calibrate your taste buds to fizzy yellow stuff, it's kind of hard to switch gears after that. Unfortunately, so you did it well. You started off with good beers, and hopefully you can keep that.
Yeah, and I think because, like if the long shot competition, half the people were women, and they would use a lot of non-traditional things, and so my mind wasn't set of, oh, I'm going to do a Pilsner, because I didn't even know what a Pilsner was. I was just thinking about flavors because I really like food and I like cooking, and so I started thinking about what's some interesting combinations, and so I made it was like it was a lavender chocolate steam ale kind of thing. There was just a lot going on, and it was pretty good. I think I did another one, and I ended up contaminating. I bought like 2 pounds of organic lavender flowers online, and 2 pounds of organic flower petals is a lot of lavender.
That's like a pillowcase full, isn't it?
It is. It is the equivalent of a pillowcase, a plastic pillowcase full. That is, I still have over half in my outside beer fridge. So every time I open it up, I get a nice lavender smell. I mean, it's sort of a potpourri for the fridge.
Yeah, at the long shot competition, I think I made I can't remember if I made the comment on mic or not, but I said something about it smelling like my grandmother's bathroom. Which, done in a certain way can be nice in a beverage. But well, that's cool. You are of an experimental nature. And what are you? The beer that you're sipping on right now is also kind of along that vein, right?
I mean, yeah, I guess because I've listened to your show about all wheat beers, and I've tried Hefeweizens that I picked up at stores, and I didn't like them. I mean, I couldn't even drink them. So I decided to sort of brew my own, and this one is a Belgian wit. Where it's a little bit low. It's only 45% wheat versus the minimum 50%. I might slowly ratchet that up as I develop more of a taste for the weedy flavor. I have friends that they like wheats, so this is what basically my attempt at letting them or giving them something to drink. It's a Belgian wit that I said 45% wheat. The other one I think was 50% Pilsner, maybe a little bit of Victory, and then it was keg conditioned with dried cranberries and dry white raisins, the zest of 1 lemon, and clementine zest. I think I put a little, like a tablespoon of coriander in the mash tun. I put just a handful of frozen cranberries into the boil, and the hop I use I probably use either Hallertau or something similar to it. Very low alpha hop. But it's really good. But I did not realize the sugar content of those 1 pound of dry white raisins. So when last night I tapped it for the first time, and I got all foam, and the foam was literally so thick that you could turn the glass upside down. I mean, it was whipped cream. I mean, I had to take my finger and to taste the foam, which the foam tasted good, and I thought, wow, that's a good sign, I guess. So I ended up like bleeding off as much pressure until obviously beer started coming off the top release. I think like I said, I put my gauges on it, and it was probably 35 psi, which is huge.
Yeah.
Anything over 8, I think, is probably pretty excessive. And then I've actually had to bleed it off. Like this morning, I got up and I bled it off as much as I could until it started frothing at the top, and now it's finally settled out, and it's really good. It's a little bit fruit juicy. Because I think that there's so much still residual sugars, because the high pressure of CO2 will cancel or halt the yeast. Like they basically can't survive when the CO2 levels get too high. So I'm not sure if I'm going to maybe rack it back into a carboy and let the sugars to drop the sugar level a little bit. I don't know, but I know next time I do this, I'm probably going to use half the amount of white raisins. But it's really I mean it's I don't know, I like it.
So you wrote a couple weeks ago with something that I hadn't really thought about. So talk about the original letter that you wrote to me.
I was just actually, since you have so many experts on the show, is trying to gain information because my local brew club, the members didn't really know, was there, any reason why you shouldn't pre-warm your grains? I always have a tendency to forget to do my calculations. Sometimes I'll have my grains in the fridge. They're 40 degrees. Sometimes they're on the counter at 72 degrees. And so the whole process of overshooting, undershooting, and then having to go and adjust my mash strike temp was always an issue. And so I was like, well, what if I just like warm these things up to when I warm the water up? That way I don't have to do any calculations. I can just say, oh, well, I'll just overshoot by 1 or 2 degrees to counterbalance the stirring, the heat you're going to lose from stirring, and that'd be it. And because I listened to your episodes. We had the what's his name, the German guy that talked about decoction.
Oh, Kai Troyster.
Yeah, he talked about the grains, and some breweries remove the hulls, and it was all these different chemicals. And I was like, well, maybe there's a reason. Maybe you want to shock your grains, like if you want to cold grains into hot water. Maybe that's will activate something. So that's why I was writing in to see if I shouldn't do it.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking before we started recording about sort of the things that we discover on this show that are common knowledge that people have always done, either because professional brewers do it or because that's just kind of how the brewing sciences evolved over time as professional brewers and home brewers did these things because that's the way their equipment was structured. I mean, the reason that decoction came about was because they had unheated mashing vessels, and they took a third of the mash out and heated it up in a copper kettle and put it back in, and then took some more out and put it back in, and so that's how that kind of came about, supposedly.
Yeah, the quote a line from the Simpsons: "My car gets 40 hogsheads to the wagon wheel, and that's the way I likes it."
Or there's the old story about the
pot roast.
Yes, exactly. The young woman. I heard it as a ham. But cut
the ends.
Exactly. The woman was watching her mother cook the holiday meal, and so she cut the ends of the ham off and put it in the oven. And her daughter says, "Well, why did you do that?" And, "Well, we've always done it that way. My mother always did it that way." And so she went to her grandmother and said, "Why do you cut the ends off the ham?" And she said, "Well, when we first got married, our oven was only this big, and we had to put." So, just because somebody else has been doing it for generations does not mean that that's the reason to do it forever. So it's interesting to step out of the realm of comfort and see if doing something a completely different way is better. So explain what you did with your first attempt, your first experiment, and before you wrote the first letter.
Well, basically, I got these 2 large cookie jars that had the screw top lids, and I put my grain inside those, and then submerged them into the pot of water. And since I used the brew in the bag method, which I've discovered through your show, also my mash tun, and basically heated up from there. To basically, I think it was, my target temp was, I think, 154. So I heated it up to maybe 157, and then took the jars out and then dumped them into back into the pot with the bag, and basically did my 1 hour mash. That was a little annoying because the glass jars got really hot and it was kind of hard to manage. Since then, I've evolved to using a oven-safe sort of turkey bag, which is a lot better because it doesn't get hot. It also you don't have to worry about obviously glass breaking, and it makes this nice insulating layer on the top of your brew pot, which I think adds sort of a thermal insulator.
Now, if someone who's not familiar with all grain brewing might say, well, why don't you just dump the grains loose in there to begin with into the cold water and just heat them up at the same time you're heating up your water to the proper temperature anyway? Why don't you just mix it all together to begin with?
That was actually a question I was going to ask you. That's the next progression. Is wait a minute, can I just dump all the grains in and let them sit? Because now you wouldn't do this, and this is where the brew in the bag method comes into play. Is there's no such thing really as a stuck mash because our water to grain ratios are so high. We could theoretically do that and get away with it. Whereas any other type of all grain brewing, you really wouldn't do that because you would get too much gelatinization and you would get stuck mashes.
And if you don't have a stuck mash because you just take the grains in the bag, lift it up, and squeeze squeeze the wort out of them. So you don't have to run water through them. You just squeeze it out of them.
And then I've employed your suggestion with having a secondary smaller pot of of mash out water, like 168 degree water, like 1 gallon, and dunk them, and then mix them around and then squeeze them again. And so I've been getting with brew in the bag, 85% efficiency.
Yeah, and I can't take credit for that. Somebody else email me.
Email
me that just to make sure that I'm not.
We'll give the credit to the Australians.
But I guess to get back kind of the point of why you wouldn't want to put the grains in the water and bring it up is because at that point, I believe, if I understand the mashing process, then you're talking about activating the enzymes, and the enzymes actually, because they're wet, not just because they're hot, they would actually be working on using the moisture in the from the water and the heat to be activated and to be breaking down those starches and proteins and such in the grain, so that you might get a different result than if you just did a regular single infusion mash. And maybe that's another experiment. Maybe you do put your grains in the water at the room temperature or the your starting temperature, and bring that up, to what you would have as your single infusion mash rest temperature, and rest for an hour and see what the difference is between those two beers. Maybe that's the next step. But so what I said basically in response to your original email was, I don't see an advantage to doing what you were doing with heating the grains at the same time as the water and not mixing the two, because my assumption was that you would be using the same amount of time and energy to bring that total thermal mass up to the proper temperature as you would bringing up the water to a higher temperature and then pouring the colder grains into the pot, therefore, warming the grains, losing the temperature of the water, and coming out at the same end point. You see what I'm saying? My theory was that if you were to do both of these side by side, you would get the same result because the same amount of time and energy would be required for both.
Right, and to sum that up would be, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right, is for physicists or scientists, you would say the law of the conservation of energy. I guess, where it's you're gonna get out what you put in, sort of thing. I'm sure you'll get emails talking about, well, that's not exactly right or something. But
I hope, please, if we're wrong, please set us straight.
Right, but yeah, you're right. You still have to bring up everything, let's have a temperature, and you're going to have to put forth the same amount of watts. For my personal goals, wasn't really efficiency; it was more simplicity. I don't have to use a grain calculator. I don't have to worry about overshooting or undershooting. Really, I just put it in there. It warms up, and I just have to know, regardless of my grain bill or my water to grain ratios. I know that all I have to do is go over my initial what I want to mash temp at, whether it be 150 to 160. I just have to go overshoot by maybe 2 to 3 degrees, because that seems to be how much heat gets lost through the stirring process and just sort of working with it to get it nice and incorporated into the water. So to me, it just makes it super easy. When I did the experiment, towards the end, I had like an aha moment, and I was like, wow, well, in these cases, it will always be more efficient to do it this way. But I didn't know. Do you want me to sort of guess describe the experiment? Or?
Yeah, start from the beginning and set up your experiment. And for our metric listeners, I've asked Darnell to include metric equivalents on his temperatures during this section so that we don't get nasty emails. So start from the beginning and give us an idea of what you did a nice write up in your follow up email. So just kind of follow. I don't know if you have that in front of you, but kind of follow along that format and give us an idea of what went on.
All right. Well, the initial experiment was. I was like, okay, so I have a control, which is the standard method of heating your water up to a degree that will compensate for the cold or reduced temperature of your grain bill. And so you add the grains in, and basically the grains cool the water, and you end up hitting your target, whatever, maybe like a 155. So I initially started that, and I made it real simple. I did 3 pounds of wheat malt, or 1.36 kilograms.
Yay, Darnell.
That was at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, or 18 degrees Celsius. Then I was going to eventually add that to 3 gallons of water, or 11.35 liters of water, that was coming off the tap at 55.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or 13 degrees Celsius. I plugged it into a calculator that you can find at rackers.org/calcs. And what it told me is that I need to heat my water up. And my mash temp, my target temp to hit was 155 Fahrenheit, or 68 degrees Celsius. But it said I had to bring my 3 gallons / 11 liters and a third of water up to 162 degrees Fahrenheit, or 73 degrees Celsius, basically to hit my target temp. So I did this, just like any brew in the bag, or just any basically type of mashing. And after 15 minutes, I made sure to stir it for 5 seconds. Just open the lid, stir it. I used the electric stove set to high because I figured electric would be the most consistent. I also preheated the eye for about 2 minutes on high, because I knew that when I did it the second time, the eye would already be a little warm. So I wanted to give it time to kind of reach a similar temperature. It ended up taking 33 minutes to bring the 3 gallons, or 11.35 liters of water up to appropriate temperature.
Okay, so that's pretty much the traditional way of doing things.
Right. And so once I did that, I just dumped the water out. Filled 2 more gallons of the cold water back into the pot to cool it back down. Turned the eye off, let it cool down for a while. Dumped the water out, and then filled it back up with another 3 gallons, or 11.35 liters of water. And this time, I put it, let the eye warm up for I think a minute. Put everything on there, and then put the bag of grains In the water, sort of floating on top, using a turkey bag or a oven-safe plastic bag, and then close the lid. And basically, the thermometer I use has a beeping indicator. So when it hits this appropriate temperature, and my temperature for the second experiment was only 2 degrees above the 155. So my target temperature to basically turn off the eye and basically start the process was 7 degrees Celsius, or 157 degrees. I still stirred it after 15 minutes, and this took me 29 minutes to do it. So technically, I saved 4 minutes.
So in your experience, if you do it this way, if you preheat the grains, you only need a couple of degrees Fahrenheit buffer to. It actually does bring the grain inside the bag up to that a temperature that is equal to the water.
It brings it really close, and it's obviously going to depend on probably your grain bill. If you have maybe a lot of grains, so the topper part of the grains, but the grains, I picked up the bag when I was dumping it out after the experiment was done, and the grains do get warm, and they get really close to the temperature of the water, and I could probably even increase it as far as the exact thing is by maybe even weighting the bag down or something, so it's fully submerged. Mm-hmm. And that would probably bring a more uniform. But to me, there's, like I said, it's going to add somewhat of a insulator, because there's waste heat being lost all over the pot and up through the water. So there's this vertical column of heat that's rising. And if you have this sort of, a milled bag of grains is fairly airy. Mm-hmm. So you're literally just throwing a blob of insulation on top. And it wasn't until after, I wish I, picked this up beforehand. It was like a duh moment. But I was looking and I was like, oh, awesome. I saved 4 minutes, and we're talking about a very weak beer. It's 1 pound per gallon. And that's 4 quarts to 1 pound ratio. What would be the percent of that? That's definitely a session beer.
Yeah. Yeah. But I've done a beer like that with, I think one of my all wheat beers was, I did my mash was like 4 quarts per pound. So it works. It still works.
Oh yeah. It works, but it's once I was looking at it, and I'm sure that very, more intelligent people listening to this podcast would probably pick up is, your grains, my grains were 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius. The water was 55 degrees or 13 degrees Celsius. So my grains are warmer than the water. So all things being equal, the grains are going to heat the water up. I'm actually using stored watts of energy in the grain to warm my water. And then I thought, for a lot of people, especially people on wells, especially deep wells, well water is usually 65 to 50 degrees probably. I don't know what it is out west where they have like this really deep, like 300-foot aquifers. But and then your room temperature in your house. So let's say it's a brew day and you're having your bag of grains sitting inside your house. Well, the average room temperature is 72 degrees. So I'd say a lot of cases, people's grains are going to be warmer than their water.
Now, around here, it would depend on the time of the season, of course, because in the wintertime, we're down around, 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius coming out of the tap. But in the summertime, as I'm sure it probably happens in your neighborhood as well, in the heat of summer, the tap water can be as high as 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around, 26 degrees Celsius. So, it would be interesting to compare the variation between the seasons. But it's interesting. You saved using this setup. You saved 4 minutes with this ratio of grain to water. So what if you did have, say, twice as much grain in the same amount of water?
I don't know.
Good answer.
I would say you have probably people with physics or math backgrounds that can do the calculations on how many degrees centigrade so much mass of X temperature would raise. I'm sure there's a very simple equation to do it. I would guess to say that. That's really a total guess. But if I say 4 minutes for 3 pounds, let's say for 6 pounds, I'd save 8 minutes. But that's, obviously just a straight shooting from the hip, country logic.
Well, we live in Georgia and Arkansas, so it's that'll work.
Forgive us.
That ought to work. So that's interesting. I mean, of course, this is one experiment, and you did the timing of this, and you didn't actually make 2 different beers, so we can't compare the result, the end results completely. But it's interesting that in this segment of the equation that there actually is a difference, and that it surprises me that there was, and that it was. 4 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but 4 minutes out of 30 is a savings of time.
And to me, it's the simplicity. I mean, I don't have to really ever think about what temperatures do I need to bring my water to. Because, like I said, my grains literally have a range of 80 to 80 to low as 40 something degrees, or below 40 sometimes. So because, like I said, sometimes they're in the fridge, sometimes they're in the shed, depending on the season. It could be in the summer; they could be up to 80 degrees or more, or in the house at 72 degrees. So to me, it just makes things so easy. I mean, not easy, but so simple. And my question, and I guess I need to do a batch where. Now, I would assume that it's not going to affect the flavor, but I mean, who knows? My curiosity is, now most organic or living organisms don't like to be shocked. Maybe that a gradual increase in balancing of temperature, that maybe your enzyme behavior might be I guess more efficient.
So I would think the next logical step would be to do 2 full brewings of beers using these 2 separate methods. And since, it would be easy for you to take a recipe or a beer that you've already done using the traditional method and then reproduce it using the heating up the grains, as you're heating up the water method, and see if there is a difference in efficiency or character of the beer.
I'd be up for making. I could just do 2 batches. I actually have several batches in the pipeline. I have. And like I said, I'll let you pick because I'll definitely be mailing those in.
Send me a menu, a beer menu.
I have it all off the top of my head. I had planned on doing a small test batch of the all oat beer.
Ooh.
That you mentioned recently, where you said, could you make a beer using all oat malt?
Yeah, or all rye.
Well, like I said, I went and ordered the oats. There's 2. It's the oatmeal cinnamon cookie.
Oh.
Which basically I took a cinnamon oatmeal cookie recipe off the internet and deconstructed it, and I'm going to try to stay to the ratio, like 50% flour or wheat, 50% oats or oat malt, cinnamon, and then instead of brown sugar, I think I'm going to do molasses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to add too many adjunct sugars. So there's that one. There's like I said, the all oat, which if it's good, I'll call it Goldilocks. If it's bad, I'll call it porridge in a glass. There's I planned on doing a chocolate Hefeweizen that I intended to call El Jefe Negro.
Mm-hmm.
A white chocolate Hefeweizen that I intended to call El Jefe Blanco.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get names unless they're decent. So this is preliminary. If it tastes like garbage, then it just gets, it's just a beer.
Now, I'm wondering, though, if for something like this, where a more kind of traditional, say a pale ale or something like that recipe might be more appropriate to remove all the wackiness of, if you cover up any subtleties with a bunch of adjuncts or spices or something, that might not be the most efficient way to do it.
What about a hoppy blonde ale?
There you go.
And by hoppy, like I said, I want to try to get my schedule where I can brew once a week. I want Sunday to be beer or brewing and barbecue day.
Oh, well, there you go. And
right, barbecue.
You add some blues music, and you got Big Foamy Head from Memphis. You could just dial into their podcast and start listening to them on Sundays when you brew.
I have to get a portable stereo for my little shed that I brew under.
Well, there you go. It's interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing further developments, and I've been surprised so far. And it'd be interesting if anybody else out there wants to try to duplicate your results. We'd be glad to hear from them as well, because you never know. You never know what you might find unless you try it.
And if there's any experts out there that say, "Oh, well, this won't work because," let me know before I go ahead and brew 2 batches.
Or let them say it won't work, and then go ahead and do it anyway. See if it does. Just as long as it's a small batch, so it's not much ventured and maybe something gained. Well, Darnell, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to hearing more.
Thanks.
Well, thanks again to Darnell. Very interesting stuff. I love to hear new brewers thinking out of the box or out of the kettle or mash tun, as it were. Is preheating your grains worth it? I'm looking forward to hearing more from Darnell and from you if you decided to try it yourself. Could be the next thing. You never know. If you do it yourself, let me know. Along with if you have brewing suggestions or questions or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can find our new DVD on our site, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, and our 2011 Brewers Logbooks are in stock. You can check out our online store for that. Also, you can check out our other DVDs, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. And we got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can check out our shirts in the store, too. If you go on the shirt, or on the shirt, if you go on the store right now, you won't see the lagering DVD and the combos associated with it because we ran out. I've got more coming. Should be here next week. So stay tuned. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Camp Chef SHPRL high-pressure single-burner cooker with detachable legs and round top, black. And Corn Stove Vent Kit. Thanks again, everybody. Those are 4 words that I thought I'd never use together. Corn Stove Vent Kit. Thanks again. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. Those are 4 words. I should say more. We appreciate your support. And don't forget that you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to BYO Magazine through the associate links on our site. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.